Good afternoon, everyone. We are now back in session. Continuing with our committee meetings, I now recognize Ms. Jill Kamnitz for the Student Learning and Achievement Committee report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. I share the responsibility for the work of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. And we have 2 items of new business today. The first one will be led by Dr. Vanessa Wren. She is bringing us an update on the Digital Learning Initiative.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. It's my pleasure to be here today. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, board members, and my colleagues. It's my pleasure to bring to you today an update on our digital learning plan. And with me today is Dr. Ashley McBride, and she is our Digital Learning Initiative Consultant, and Dr. Heath Belcher, who's the Associate Superintendent in Lincoln County Schools. One of the things we want to bring forth to you today is our current plan and impacts that we've experienced from COVID to this plan, some supports that are in place, and a good problem to have is our need to update our current plan. This plan was legislated in 2015 with the purpose to make sure that our educators are prepared to have digital age learning principles and modern teaching instruction in their classroom with the sole purpose to provide a better education experience for our students and to prepare them for the future. So as we move forward with this, I want to really talk quickly about some of the COVID impacts to our current plan. COVID was certainly an accelerator to the plan that we have in place. Pre-COVID, we had about 5 LEAs that said, I don't need any devices. Right now, we have 88 LEAs statewide, K through 13, who are fully one-to-one, and the other ones, some type in between, 3 through 12, take home, not take home, but some type of variation in between. But that's somewhat of a good problem to have because also at the same time, we had an increased access to digital content. When our first wave of coronavirus relief funds came out, we made allocations to our PSUs for student devices, staff devices, a statewide LMS, and of course hotspots. I think to about the tune of about 500,000 hotspots across the state. Well, one of the things that we've learned from those allocations and what we hear probably the loudest right now from our schools is their worry over how they will sustain that. So they've got a lot in right now, but what will they do in the future as they need to repair or when subscriptions run out? Another thing that we learned from COVID and the impact on this plan and why we are now looking at updating that plan is the value of our school technicians and our digital coaches in the building. Sometimes they're called instructional technology facilitators. All of our schools don't have the luxury of having that in their building. You know, it's hit or miss if they all have librarians, but certainly the value of those were definitely promoted through this, and it's something that we want to continue working on in our plan. We also learned many connectivity lessons through this. We knew that if a child lives somewhere where connectivity is available, we could solve that problem, right? We did many things. We had internet service providers who provided discounted services. We had schools that would find ways to pay for those services. But where our challenge is the approximately 200,000 students that live where no connectivity is available. So that's something that we are continuing to work on, partner on with DIT. The DIT has got many plans in place to try to, and what we're working with them is finding the exact physical address of every K-12 student that doesn't have connectivity and working to build up the infrastructure in that last mile area. And as you just heard from Dr. Murphy this morning, the tremendous expansion of online learning. And certainly that impacted our NCVPS enrollments, but it also impacted what our LEAs and charter schools are doing as they provide online instruction as well. And then that also tucks in there the challenge for full remote. And I was so proud to hear Dr. Murphy talk about the synchronous instruction is so important in online learning. And one of the things I want to also highlight is every teacher who I've ever worked with that has taught in an online environment has come back and said, my face-to-face classroom practice is much better as a result. They learn that sense of community, communication, connectivity, the presence that you provide to students all the time. So what I think will be interesting to see as we move forward is how all of our teachers at scale who had to shift to some type of online blended learning and the impact they have in their skills as a result. So I do think that that's been a tremendous accelerator and one that we need to continue to monitor and promote as we move forward. We want to embrace those good things and keep those moving forward. But all of this work had many ongoing supports and partnerships, and I'm thankful for those that we had, and I want to highlight some of the supports that we've put in place and some of the partnerships. One of our partnerships is with the Consortium for School Networking, better known as COSN. And COSN is a national organization that supports all the things that we do in our digital learning plan. And one of the things we were able to do last year was to make sure that all of our technology leaders across the state could attend the virtual conference. And we have gotten positive feedback from them. And this was a staff that really needed some building up this past year. And another thing that we're very proud of is our Certified Education Technology Leader seal. And we believe so strongly in building up our chief technology officers, our directors of technology, our CIOs across the state. And this is a seal that they can get that's very rigorous. They must take an exam, they attend class. It has about a 63% passage rate, much like National Board for Teaching. The same type of certification. They must demonstrate that they have knowledge in technology, cybersecurity, leadership, and most importantly, curriculum and instruction. So it's all of that together to be one of these certified leaders. So we're in a bit of a race with the state of Texas. We have 68 certified technology leaders in our state and 27 working on recertification. We were leading Texas. I think they're ahead of us by about 3, but we're hoping with these research we can move back ahead. And then a new thing that we've done with COSN this year is participating in the Trusted Learning Environment. And this is the only national program for school districts to show that they protect students' data privacy and everything there is trusted. And so we're working on them to earn that seal. And then one other approach that we have as a support for our digital learning plan is a professional development with our EPPs. So this is a two-pronged approach. We work constantly with our teachers and our administrators for digital learning competencies, and they have to earn those 2.0 CEUs as part of their licensure renewal. But we also wanted to work with our EPP faculty. So we are working with Laura Bilbro-Berry with UNC Systems and our North Carolina Independent Colleges and Universities, and we've designed 4 online modules for staff to be better prepared in digital learning competencies. And they have just partnered with the Friday Institute to provide a rubric and evaluate some of the work they've been doing, and this is year 3 of that work. And so really excited about that. Because we want to make sure our teachers in training have all the tools they need when they first come into a classroom. Another support that we have is our partnership with the Friday Institute. And part of the digital learning plan is making sure that we have just-in-time embedded learning for our teachers. So this past year we had a cohort of teacher coaches and central office coaches that was designed specifically to support our teachers during remote, online, and blended instruction. We also asked Friday Institute to conduct 3 case studies for us to find out what is the impact of all of what we've been doing in this transition and what can we continue to do from this that will help us down the road. And what they found from those case studies is that our early adopters felt like they were as prepared as they possibly could have been for the last year, and that the importance of flexibility, professional development, and a different way to assess and take attendance on students in remote learning was needed. So those are things we probably knew they were going to find out, but it was nice to have that data to back us up. And they are also working right now as they support us in updating the digital learning and media inventory plan. That is an annual inventory that's completed every June 30th, and our PSUs put in data points on what they're doing with learning management systems, devices, fixed asset systems. So some of the things we need to know to make decisions. And then one other support that we have, and this support is actually legislated, we provide an online digital literacy program called Learning.com to our Tier 1 districts. And Learning.com is the vendor that supplies that to Tier 1 districts. We've allocated about $1 million this year for that program. One of the evaluation points that we are working to collect is, did students who had access to that program, how did they perform? Did we see any change in what they were able to do as a result? And we're working with Learning.com now to get that information. And then next is, of course, our Digital Learning Initiative grants. And on the next screen, you will see a map, and everywhere you see a pinpoint is a district who has won one of those grants. So each year, we award a $50,000 planning grant or a $150,000 implementation grant, and it gives all of our districts the leeway to decide, are they going to work on digital learning competencies, micro-credentials, robotics, coding, many different things they can do in support of that work. And I think that's one of the best things that we've done that has really built up some of the programs across the state. You will see that many of our largest districts don't apply for that because the money amount really doesn't scale for them, but it is a critical win for our small districts, the 50,000 or 150,000, to do some of the work they might not otherwise be able to do. So I know it's way more important to hear from someone in the field and what they're doing with that than to hear from me. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Heath Belcher, and he's going to talk about some of the work that they've done in Lincoln County schools with, they've won 2 grants, a planning grant and an implementation grant. And so he's done a lot of work with micro-credentials and personalized learning. So Dr. Belcher.
Thank you, Dr. Wren, Dr. McBride, and members of the board. It's great to see you this morning. And I want to share with you Lincoln County Schools experience. We are one of those critical win kind of districts that we're able to take advantage of the digital learning implementation and planning grant. And our experience and journey in digital learning really started prior to the pandemic. We had no intention or no plan to move to a one-to-one initiative. And of course, then the pandemic happened, and our county commissioners approached our district and said, what can we do to help? And so they provided $1.2 million in support for us to move to a one-to-one initiative with Chromebooks. So that was the start. When that happened in the district, we knew at that point, we've got the Chromebooks, now what? Because we really did not have the professional capacity. The teachers, it was new to them, it was new to the administrators, it was new to all of us. And so the grants really allowed us to leverage some of those opportunities. And so with that, we applied for the planning grant, for the implementation grant, and received both grants. And that allowed our district and our leadership to really begin to focus on 2 priorities, specifically as it relates to digital teaching and learning. And initially we knew we needed to have lessons that were different than what we had done prior to the pandemic, and then of course now as we continue to implement digital learning and teaching in the classroom, it's going to look a little bit different. And so the lesson delivery needed to change, and it needed to be authentic and relevant. And then the second part of that was we also recognized that parents and students needed to feel that shift as well. And so our second priority, and we had a list of priorities, these were the top 2 that the grants helped address, was to really look at a dashboard. And that digital dashboard would then help us create a learner profile, so that students and parents could begin to understand and recognize, okay, what's different, how is my student performing? And that's part of the planning grant that we received, and planning the rollout of that dashboard. And I want to share with you a little bit of that experience and some of the outcomes that we experienced as a result of this. And so what we've been able to do, we were able to contact coaches or consultants, experts, who are very familiar with personalized learning, digital learning competencies, and those things that we really had limited experience with. We had some lower level training, but had not really dug in very deeply into some of the work that we needed to do. So we were able to identify these experts, and they were able to come beside us and help us begin that implementation process. And so they provided our leadership with a clear strategy to help coach and accelerate our district from a level of apprehension to digital learning to really a level of acceptance and even acknowledgement of the need to shift for some of our classroom instruction. And so the implementation grant, that's allowed us to train 130 classroom teachers and 52 administrators. That is all of our administrative staff, principals, assistant principals, on the digital competencies and also personalized learning. And so we created out of that a micro-credentialing pathway, actually two pathways. One is the digital learning competencies pathway, and the other is the personalized learning pathway. And so our 130 teachers have began that process, and were trained in that and could choose which pathway they could go down. And we're currently working with those teachers in implementing personalized learning and the digital learning competencies in their classroom. And so that's approximately out of that about 25% of our classrooms that we have currently identified as prototype classrooms for personalized learning as they earn that micro-credential. And then these prototype classrooms can serve as model classrooms as other teachers come alongside of them. And then out of that, we've also, of course, our goal by June of 2022 is we'll have over 50% of our classrooms implementing digital learning competencies and personalized learning in the classroom. So that's been a big shift in Lincoln County from where we were back in 2017, 2018 to where we are now and where we're going. The second part of that is the learning dashboard. We're currently piloting that across multiple schools and multiple classrooms. And we expect by the third and fourth quarter, we'll have the dashboard in place so that we can then can pilot that and then can replicate and scale that to other schools and classrooms across the district. And we look forward to seeing how that works out with the student learner profile. And so some of our next steps, our story really doesn't end with the goals and outcomes that I've shared with you. We know that the needs of our students and our community is changing and will require skills that extend well beyond our initial planning. And so now we're obviously looking at how do we replicate, scale up, and sustain what we've already started. And so we're looking at obviously continuing to prepare our teachers in an environment that is not only different, but that also leverages these pathways to their advantage so that their students can experience success and come out from the classrooms, and if that is in our elementary schools, our middle schools, but they're prepared for the next level and ultimately ready for and prepared for post-secondary success in an environment that's going to look very different than obviously it did prior to the pandemic and then after the pandemic. And so these grants have enabled us to be able to begin that process. We still have a lot of work to do. Some of our next steps that we're looking at are flexible learning environments in the classroom, and then also opportunities for student choice in their pathways and collaboration so that they're motivated to continue to learn and they truly are excited about learning, and then the next steps, what comes after high school. And then finally also even some flexible and alternative assessment models where students, we can identify assessment models that best fit a student's learning style and their unique approach to learning. So those are some of the things that these grants have enabled us to do. We've started that work. We look forward to continuing and sustaining that work over the next several years, and certainly appreciate the support that the Teaching and Learning Division at DPI has provided, and of course all the support that the State Board has provided in those efforts as well. At this time I want to turn it over to Dr. McBride.
A little tight over here. Good afternoon. So far, Dr. Wren has explained to you all of our partnerships and our supports and the wonderful work that we've been able to do through the Digital Learning Initiative. And then Dr. Belcher has really been able to highlight what they've been doing in Lincoln County as a result of some of that work. And Lincoln County Schools is just one example of the many stories that demonstrate how the Digital Learning Initiative has provided opportunities for growth. But now we need to look at what's next. The current North Carolina Digital Learning Plan was written in 2015. It served as a roadmap for state, district, and school levels and allowed us to focus on sets of goals, recommendations, action steps, and offers a series of metrics for success. In March, Jill Darrow from our Digital Teaching and Learning team and Dr. Sean Kellogg from the Friday Institute presented to the board a report outlining the progress made with the current priorities for this plan. But 2015 was 6 years ago, and since then, we've seen significant growth in digital teaching and learning practices. Technologies have evolved. Cybersecurity attacks have become a reoccurring news story for both private and public sectors. And the COVID-19 pandemic has illuminated issues of digital equity that need to be addressed. For North Carolina to remain a leader in digital teaching and learning, we need to update our current digital learning plan. Next slide. Our goals for this plan are to make sure that we celebrate what we've done over the last 6 years. Sorry, next slide. We want to make sure that we celebrate what we've done over the last 6 years. We want to make sure that we embed in this plan a continuous feedback cycle of quantitative and qualitative data that informs our digital learning initiative work. And we want to make sure that we're providing appropriate and timely resources that are relevant and customizable to meet the personalized needs of our public school units. Because we need to personalize their supports just like we ask them to personalize student supports. So the work toward updating this plan has already begun. We've spent the last few months researching the most current frameworks for educational technology, digging deep into quantitative metrics available to us by the Digital Learning Media Inventory and the Digital Learning Progress Rubric, conducting focus groups with PSUs to gather qualitative data around their usage of the current digital learning plan, where they felt successful, and what barriers they still have in their way. All of this research will culminate in the design of the North Carolina Digital Learning Plan framework and a set of high-level goals that we hope to achieve as we implement this new plan. This winter, we intend to have a draft of this plan. In the spring, we're going to be working to redraft and finalize that plan. And we intend that by the summer of 2022, we'll be able to present that plan to you. Before we move on more about the plan itself, we wanted to share some preliminary data from those focus groups that I just mentioned to you. We've come across 2 items that have shown up in every one of these meetings. These items are the need for sustainable funding and technology-focused human resources. COVID's provided many schools the opportunity to give every student an internet-connected device. But there is unease that in 4 years, every one of those devices are going to need to be refreshed. Current budgets, especially those who have minimal local funds coming in, are concerned that they will not be able to meet that demand in 2024. With the addition of devices and quick switches in learning modalities, the second concern is the human capacity to ensure that we're able to move forward. More technicians are needed to support the large influx of devices. Without sufficient technical staffing, devices in need of repair or identified cybersecurity concerns can go too long without being able to be addressed. There's also been a call for providing instructional technology facilitators for every school. This role is currently in our 2015 digital learning plan, but most schools in our state still go without or are having to share a single individual among multiple locations. Providing each school with this support allows for personalization of teacher professional learning and just-in-time coaching supports that can have drastic positive effects on the classroom. As we work on this plan, we want to make sure that we continue alignment. We are going to end up making a framework that meets our state and PSU needs. And we're going to work to ensure that we are aligning with Operation Polaris and the State Board of Education strategic plans. But as we update this plan, we want to ensure that we're hearing the voices of all those who will be impacted by this work. So yesterday afternoon, the applications went out for a work team. This work team is going to be made up of teachers, principals, technology directors, PSU leaders, librarians, instructional technology facilitators, and technical support personnel. Our intention is to make sure that we have at least one person from each region in each one of those sections. So essentially we're going to have a team of anywhere from 48 to 56 individuals, depending on how many apply. This will allow us to make sure that we hear feedback not only from every stakeholder type, but also from every region. By the time we update you again, unless we don't see you until summer, we will have our team in place and a solid framework for this plan. We'll now open up for any questions for any of the 3 of us.
Questions around the table for any of our 3 presenters?
I just wanted to ask for some clarification. You said the feedback for this with all the stakeholders, you would have at least one teacher for the whole region. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So the intention is that we would have 8 teachers on the final team.
Right.
So it would be 8 teachers, so 1 teacher from each region.
Okay.
8 principals, 1 principal from each region. 8 ITFs, 1 ITF from each region, so on and so forth. So that way, and then our intention is to try to make sure that we're not hitting the same district every time too. So we want to make sure that we're spread out.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the differences in needs within a region can be very vast, especially when we think about digital and the technology in general. So I just wanted to see how that. I was thinking about like that one teacher speaking on behalf of so many different spaces. They would definitely have to pull from every district or multiple districts to get that a really good clear picture of what is actually needed. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
and whenever we build this team, our intention is to make sure that we have representatives from large districts, from
Right.
small districts, from rural districts, from urban districts, and just making sure that we're mixing it up really well.
Because we definitely have some districts that have a variety of tools, lots of tools that they could share even. So I just wanted to make sure that, and then you have on the other end of the region, you could have some that don't have access to those tools at all. So,
Right.
okay.
And I just want to add one point, is it's very important when we say principals, we've talked about, we definitely need to include some chief academic officers in that group, because if we are not connecting seamlessly with what's coming out of instruction, then we are missing the mark. So we have already talked and planned for how we include chief academic officers in that discussion. Often they're left out of things that we do in technology. And so we've learned from that in the past, and that will be a critical stakeholder that's included in those discussions.
Thank you.
Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Ms. Kamitz, and thank you, Dr. Belcher, for your presentation. Actually, my question pertains to a point that you made in the presentation around micro-credentialing. Tell me how teachers benefit from that. Does it count towards CEU renewal credits or?
So yes, it does. In our district, we do provide CEUs for the micro-credentialing. Of course, CEUs traditionally are time-based. The advantage to a micro-credential, it's no longer time-based. It is skill-based or competency-based. And so typically under the current CEU model, there's lots of examples, but you may have a teacher that's working towards something that they're motivated in when it's under a micro-credentialing model. They want to learn more about this. And so they then pursue a micro-credential within that particular area, and then they demonstrate competency within that area. Versus the old model where you typically may have just a general technology-based CEU, and it could be they go to 10 technology workshops. Some of them they may never bring back to their classroom and use. Mm-hmm. So the advantage to a micro-credentialing pathway, and I think North Carolina can be at the forefront in some of the micro-credentialing opportunities, and there's a lot of work right now being done around that. But it's really to advantage what a teacher desires to learn, what they want to implement in their classroom, and then ultimately how they leverage expertise in that particular area.
That's great. And so I imagine they get a badge.
They do get badges, yes ma'am.
That's what I'm interested in.
So Dr. Belcher is too modest to share this, but the work in Lincoln County Schools, where they have created a template to make sure that the micro-credential is quality and relevant to the teacher, that template is now being used by the North Carolina Working Group on micro-credentials. So they are using the work that Lincoln County has started, and we're using that as a statewide template, if you will, as we grow towards micro-credentialing. So I just needed to put that in there.
Absolutely, and probably a rubric is used to some degree, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Work samples, student work samples, teacher work samples, all the products that they produce, along with a rubric that evaluates that.
And my final point is about the representation of principals and teachers around the state per region. I think it's a great idea. I would probably, my only point is, and I'm sure you're already thinking of this, making sure that you have middle, high school, elementary, because I'm sure that will.
Yes, that's our intention. When they fill out the document, they're telling us school location, region, all of the information. We're going to take all of that into account to try to make sure that we get a very diverse group of individuals.
Thank you.
One more question for Mr. Ford, and then
So very briefly, just to build on that point and the point from Ms. Floyd. When you look at the stakeholder groups, I'm wondering, a particular group that may have a whole lot of insight would be EC divisions, linguistically diverse. And so I was just wondering, are we wedded to the number of one teacher, one principal to region, or can that be adjusted? Because I really do think, to the point, the variance is so wide that if there's not anything prohibitive, if we could consider expanding that.
We can adjust.
Yeah.
And we really are kind of waiting to see what the interest level is and who puts forth saying that they're interested in doing this work, because it is going to be from December to summer. And we are compensating for that. But we have to see who applies, who's interested, and then go from there. So
Anything, I think, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the board, but if the board can assist in any way and helping to increase that recruitment pool, I think
Thank you.
that's something we'd be interested in.
All right, thank you so much to all three of you. Dr. Belcher, particularly, thank you for coming and sharing your journey with us. It always makes, when we hear about initiatives like this, it always makes it more meaningful to us to actually hear what a district is doing. And it sounds like you're doing transformative work in your district, so thank you for that. Our second new business item is Learning, Recovery, and Acceleration Research and Evaluation Priorities. Dr. Korn is going to walk us through this, and I will tell you that, Dr. Marr, you're starting us off?
I'm just going to talk for a minute.
All right, but I will say that you will be amazed at the work that Dr. Korn has already accomplished in her short time with the department. So, Dr. Marr.
All right. Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to take a minute to kind of set this up for everyone. So again, thank you for allowing us to share some of the work of the Office of Learning, Recovery, and Acceleration. As you know, the OLR has been hard at work for the past 7 months now. During this time, we've provided guidance, support, and oversight of the school extension program. We've used initial findings from that program to develop 2 additional summer programs, the Summer Bridge and Career Accelerators. We've been working through 1 research study, working on additional studies and grant proposals. We're also working on data analysis from school extension and a pandemic-related survey. Additionally, we're working on required JLOC reports for school extension and learning recovery, and look forward to bringing those to you in the near future. I just wanted to note about yesterday. So yesterday, we concluded with a discussion of operationalizing the state strategic plan. And so while a strategic plan provides us with direction, like any map, on occasion, you have to pivot within your plan when you encounter obstacles or opportunities. During the conversation yesterday, we also talked about utilizing a continuous improvement model, and the Office of Learning and Recovery embraces that model. And in fact, our 2 summer programs are examples of that. We had a program run in the summer. We did some really quick analysis from that program, and then developed 2 additional programs, which we will study subsequently and then make recommendations going forward for future summers. So with that said, we're really excited to bring the research and evaluation plan, and as you'll hear today, Dr. Korn not only hit the ground running, but has been especially thoughtful and productive in this work. In leading the effort, Dr. Korn worked both internally and externally to develop the logic model and the research and evaluation plan. It is a comprehensive plan that embraces the whole child model, which we heard a lot about over the last couple of days. The OLR not only believes that this model puts us on the path to recovery, but really gives us an opportunity to engage in the continuous improvement work. And based on yesterday, I think we all agree that that is the path towards recovery and acceleration. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Korn.
Thank you, Dr. Marr. Bring this down just a little bit so we can go ahead and move forward. I just want to say, Superintendent Truitt, how excited I am to be part of this team, have an opportunity to lead the research and evaluation work for learning recovery in partnership with the folks sitting behind me and with all of you. I've been partners with the department for many, many years, and to have an opportunity for DPI and the state board to set its own research and evaluation agenda for the very first time. As you all know, so much of the work that we do is driven by external expectations, federal, state, And so I just think it's a really unique opportunity. I really want to seize it to be able to say with a lot of clarity what our priorities are, what we value most in studying about our students, our teachers, our classrooms. In your board materials, we've put together a kind of, it's comprehensive, to Dr. Marr's point, a first draft research and evaluation plan. And so Dr. Townsend Smith and I, as we talked through it, realized it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of information. And so the intent is to do a presentation today, do a relatively high-level overview, and then come back in December for discussion. So I'm going to leave you with like 3 or 4 reflection questions to think about between now and a month from now, and would really invite your feedback and to make this a discussion and a conversation so that we all can kind of come to consensus on what we know to be those most critical pieces. We all know that resources are limited, and we want to make sure that we're both studying and directing our efforts at the things that are most valuable for understanding and telling the story of North Carolina's experience, of our students, our teachers, our principals during this pandemic. That's really where I'm starting from. I also, and one of the reflection questions that we'll discuss is thinking about the information we want to have, 6 months from now, a year from now, to be able to really understand what has happened to students and how we've helped them recover and accelerate learning. And I think that this is a conversation I'm so glad that we're having now, because I've done this work with the department before and lots of other schools and districts around the state where it happens so much later, and then you're having to go back and scramble. So again, I really appreciate the vision of this board and the superintendent's leadership on this. So what have I been doing for the first 2 months I've been here? I have talked to almost every division in DPI. I have spent time internally focused, asking staff, asking leadership, what are their priorities? These are the folks that have been in the trenches, in the building, leading the work through the pandemic. So asking folks in the state superintendent's office, DPI directors and staff, and also State Board of Education staff. We met with the attorneys. We've been meeting and really trying to pull out and ask questions about what should we be studying over the next 1, 2, 4 years. If you go to the next slide. And as we've been having these conversations, I've been trying to pull out of folks, what is the purpose of this work? What have I been charged with? What has our office been charged with? And it really kind of boiled down to 2 big pieces. One is about evaluating the implementation of impact of the use of the ARP dollars at the state and local level. Like what worked, what didn't work, what should we continue going forward, what should we expand, and then also thinking about, are there places, we are data rich in this state. When you'll see, and when you look on the evaluation plan, there's a huge long list of state level data sources. How can we use the data that we have? How can we use the research partners and the research resources in this state at the universities all over this state to identify, extend, and scale programs that demonstrate impact for students at the local level? Are there ways, this has been a vision, I think, of many of the deputy superintendents and leaders in the building for many years, is there a way that we could create a clearinghouse to share information with local school district about what's working, why it's working, and how they can learn from one another? I think this is a big priority for the whole agency. So having some strategy about what that looks like and what data we're using to identify those promising practices. You have the next slide. As we were kind of defining the intent of the work, we also recognized that there are some guardrails, right? We can't research and evaluate every single thing. So what are the things we are required to do? That is pretty clearly laid out in the North Carolina approved U.S. Department of Education ARC plan. We also, as you all are very well aware, had some legislation that came out that was pretty prescriptive about what the department should and could, and districts could and should do with some of the COVID dollars. Obviously, Operation Polaris, the state board's strategic plan, and the comprehensive remedial plan, all were documents that I dug into, read, highlighted, trying to pull out what were the priorities already set forth in these big docs. Also asking this question about from those in this building, and now the next question will be for those in the field. What are the critical outcomes for students and educators that we need to be tracking? We want to make sure we're using existing data sources where possible. We want a question I have, and again, another question, reflection question for you all, and those listening is, there is an enormous amount of research going on in the state right now already that started before the pandemic. Proposals were written during the pandemic, things were just awarded. How can we leverage that existing research? So asking a question for the research community, both in the state and nationally, how are you studying North Carolina schools, and what can we as leadership learn from that? How can we learn alongside you? And then if there are new targeted COVID intervention research studies, please let's get that information to the people in this building and the local level leaders. And then finally, something that this board acted on with great haste, which I think was critical to get this in place, is an additional work with the SAS EBOS contract to do an impact analysis of lost instructional time for the 2020-2021 school year. And for the very first time, that data is going to be pretty powerful in understanding what went on in our schools. I mentioned this yesterday during the planning retreat. Another question that I've been trying to come to consensus on is, what are the major research and evaluation questions? There's like a million questions underneath each of these, but these are the big questions we're trying to answer. One is around implementation. One is around the impact, the nearer and longer term outcomes of the state and local learning recovery and acceleration strategies on students, educators, and families by subgroup and contextual variables, and you'll see all that in your board materials. And then another critical piece that a leader here in the department helped me lift up and recognize was about a focus on continuous improvement. What strategy should be considered for continuation, expansion, and targeting going forward? So I know this is very tiny, so we'll scroll ahead. And I actually have a way more complicated one than this. So, but we're going to start here. Okay, so Deanna, if you'll go to the next one. So we tried to pull out, working really closely with the Office of Learning Recovery, looking at our U.S. Department of Education plan, to try to articulate the core strategies of learning recovery as defined by the state of North Carolina. And so you'll see here what those, I think we've got 6 kind of major strategies, and then tried to articulate and categorize them in those smaller, those lighter blue boxes. And if you go to the next one, we've pulled out kind of these major outcomes. Again, it goes into more details in your board materials, and something that I certainly, if there are questions on any of this, but I think something that I was a little bit surprised about as I was having these conversations inside the building, I thought that the focus would be really tight around academic outcomes for students. And through the conversations I've had over the past 2 months, it really expanded to that whole child framework. It really was the health and well-being of students, health and well-being of our educators, and families. I heard again and again from the folks sitting behind me that this pandemic did not just impact the students, it impacted our families, the families all across North Carolina, and that it's going to be important as a state, as leadership, making policy level decisions about engaging families in the school, and schools being a core part of the community, that we need to understand what happened, what the needs are, and how we can address it. So here is, again, conversations have been rich around this about what are the most critical student characteristics that we need to be able to disaggregate the data by. This is an important slide because we don't want anybody to be surprised on the report side when we're disaggregating students by all of these different characteristics and district and school contextual factors. So I think this slide requires conversations, especially with local level leaders. I do not want a principal to be surprised when we start disaggregating data like this. I don't want superintendents to be surprised, school boards, because that's where the rubber hits the road, and they're the ones that are going to have to answer questions in their communities if there are differential impacts. If you go to the next one, I think, yep, next step. So just real quick, at a high level, and Dr. Marr mentioned this, so the plan was to have this conversation with you all today, and then really begin to have conversations with those external critical stakeholder groups, the superintendents, district leaders, local school boards. We know that it's going to be important in partnership with our legislative staff to talk to members of the legislature, the education chairs. Dr. Marr yesterday went to the new commission oversight around COVID funding. We know that we're going to be creating an ARP committee of practitioners. They will be really involved in this work and giving us feedback throughout this process. We are interested in looking at leveraging those existing research and evaluation studies. We're going to be hiring 2 research analysts that are going to help us with this work. That we were working on that late last week. But we do have some kind of points in time that you all should know about. We've got reports due to Joint Ed Oversight January 15th, that's on the school extension program. We've actually got 2 reports due March 15th. One is that SAS EVAS study, an initial one. Oh, and what's the other one? What's the other March 15th? Virtual Academy Studies. Thank you, Gallery. Yes, that we're running jointly with Dr. Wren. Thank you. And then the December 15th is the technical report for that SAS EVAS study, is the December 15th. So obviously there's updates to this board prior to those reports going to Joint Ed Oversight. And then with U.S. Department of Education, it's basically regular and ongoing was what we committed to. So these are the questions for consideration between now and next month, and of course we would be happy to engage in questions today and in between now and the next board meeting. But how do we prioritize analysis, or do we, for these student characteristics and contextual variables of interest? Are there any ongoing research or evaluation studies that you all are aware of in your regions that we should know about that would help us understand the teaching and learning in North Carolina schools from 2019, 2020 to 2024? What are the most promising practices for learning recovery and acceleration in the field? And then this is one that's of personal interest to me about beyond these state mandated and federal reports, what types of deliverables, data visualizations would be most helpful to this board, to the department, and to the field, so that for that continuous improvement process. If we're waiting 6 months, a year out, that is not helpful to local or state level leaders trying to make decisions today. So we're trying to build some of those questions in, and these are the kinds of questions that we'll be asking with our external stakeholder partners too. And I think with that, that's the last slide. So happy to take any questions, either of us.
I would just add to these questions, and we now have a homework assignment, colleagues, and we're going to model for all the students out there that when you get a homework assignment, you do it. And part of that work in consideration of these questions is you will find in your board materials a second attachment. There's the PowerPoint, but then there's also a 4-page draft that we will use as the basis of discussion next month too. So please do take time to read that carefully and think through in light of these 4 questions. So that being said, are there any immediate questions today for Dr. Korn or Dr. Marr?
I have a question of Dr. Korn. I know you love research. It just exudes, and I want to step away from you because it might get on. No, we need you. But in terms terms of learning loss, seems like a base question would be to resolve a description of a learning loss. Have you done that? Or is that necessary, or is it something what is a learning loss? I think that would be a good starting point. How would you describe that, so you can do statistical things with it?
Yeah, so we've tried to move towards the language of lost instructional time.
Yes.
As opposed to learning loss,
Yes.
right? Learning loss was what the U.S. Department of Education used over about a year and a half ago, and they actually transitioned away from that language because of the negative connotation, right, and this idea that. So we talk a lot about lost instructional time, and that doesn't mean that teachers weren't engaged in the teaching and learning process over the course of 14 months. That recognizes that they went through an unprecedented experience. And so that all of these external factors, I don't want to say inhibited students from learning, but certainly disrupted their learning in a way that negatively is seen negatively in student performance and other characteristics. So I think for us, as we talk about quote unquote learning loss or lost instructional time, what does that mean? It means that we would have expected in a normal year of teaching, students would have achieved a certain level of knowledge. They didn't get that because of the disrupted experience. And what we're going to try to do is capture that in terms of months, days, weeks, years, whatever it might be, of lost instructional time. So some other folks call it unfinished learning. We can call it that if you like. The superintendent and I wrote a piece early on in my tenure. We're not concerned so much about the words. We're more concerned about the work. And so we want to be able to adequately describe to folks what had happened, what happened, right? And so part of that will be this idea of lost instructional time. Is that clear enough?
It's getting there.
I would add one additional piece, and again, why that SAS-EVA study is so important. That will be the very first kind of rigorous student level analysis that looks at students' predicted score, business as usual, if there had never been a pandemic, where they were predicted to have performed compared to their actual scores for 2021 for a number of outcome measures. And what we've been talking to the EVAS team about in partnership with Dr. Tomberlin and Dr. Howard is about how we might use that as an estimate for like the impact of lost instructional time, like thinking about it in turn, because it's really complicated and trying to report out effect sizes, and instead really trying to make it approachable by this board, by superintendents, to be able to have a conversation with their community about what the impact has been on students. So I think we're in those conversations, and would absolutely know that we need to keep this board in those discussions with us.
It's critical that this work is done for many reasons, but we must have North Carolina specific data about whatever we want to call it, lost instructional time, unfinished learning. What we don't want is for the assessment companies and the vendors to be defining what the outcomes are or are not. Yeah. It needs to be our data about our students.
And this, again, the folks in this building and leadership that thought in Power School we should be thinking about attendance, blended, virtual, or face-to-face as one of those important student characteristics of interest. So one of the things that we've been whiteboarding and trying to figure out is what is that calculation at the student level? Is there a school? That's a contextual variable of the school too. So those are the kinds of things we've been that's where that's been a really interesting, very critical piece of the conversation that is going to continue to emerge, and would welcome any feedback, or if y'all, and something that's been helpful too is if y'all read an article or report and the way that the data is presented makes sense to you, and you feel like, oh, this is a great way to talk about the impact of, on students and teachers, please let us know, because we're using that as to kind of guide how the data and reports are shaped on the end.
And just one final quick question. Are you connecting and communicating with other states on how they're addressing this issue?
Yes, or that's the hope, but it's so new, you know?
It is new, but I'm
It's so new,
sure
but that's something we actually, so the EVOS team has a handful of other states that has they have statewide contracts with, and those, you know, that would be kind of doing the same sorts of analysis. And then I've connected with a couple, I've talked to a couple individual states, but we're really looking for other folks in our, you know, an
Yeah,
office.
of course, it would have to be within the state,
Mm-hmm.
but learning across the
Absolutely.
nation. Thank you.
We also, I would also just mention, so Dr. Stegall and I will be joining the superintendent next week at CCSSO, which is really focused on learning recovery, ARP policy, and so we'll make some efforts also to talk
That'd
with
be
other
great.
states while we're there, to be able to communicate, see
Absolutely.
essentially what's happening in other states in terms of the strategies they're approaching. But one of the important things I think to note is North Carolina is a really different place. Not many states have the data system that we have, right? Like, so having a single SIS is huge for us. So to be able to carry out a lot of this work, you know, we're the envy of a lot of other places, which is one of the reasons we're inundated with research requests from around the country.
Which means we'll be a spotlight now.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Thank you for your presentation. I thought clearly this is very thoughtful, and I appreciate that, and I'm excited about it. I'm curious how maybe some qualitative measures will be used around student voice, and I'm not talking about just anecdotes, like, you know, to scale, and how students' voice can be a piece of their experiences with the return to school.
Do you want to talk about your?
So part of, as we've talked about this, we've talked a lot about having qualitative measures in order to better explain or help explain some of the quantitative data that we get.
Great.
The two researchers that we are hiring, that we currently are looking through, we are looking for somebody with qualitative expertise. So we're trying to balance out both. And I happen to be a mixed methods person. I did some qualitative mixed methods as well, right? So although we have some quant background, we have kind of a good mix, I think, of what we're trying to get in researchers. Later today, one of the requests you're going to get at the board is an ask for $500,000 to conduct qualitative studies.
Awesome.
So yes, that is front of mind for us as well, is to have qualitative data to be able to talk about it
But
as well.
I love a focus on I love a focus on student voice for that qualitative data. We have so much survey and, you know, and kind of student performance data, so really prioritizing student voice with those qualitative studies. I love that idea.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
And I too, Dr. Korn, wanted to say thank you so much. And I really appreciate the passion and the urgency that you have in this work, because I don't know if a lot of people know, but right now, like, districts are moving as usual. Like, you know, we haven't necessarily had the opportunity to dive in at this level of work and making sure that we can truly do all of the really great things to really impact and really help our children recover this time in the instruction. And I appreciate your clarification on the language, because for 14 months we did have teachers working really hard, tracking down kids. So if I can't find them, I can't teach them. And I think I really appreciate you lifting up that language, because in no way, shape, or form do we ever want our educators to feel like they sat down for 14 months. So, but I really appreciate you all lifting that up and really having this urgency, because that's how we feel in the field. I know my colleagues are feeling that as well. There is an urgency amongst our whole state and district. So thank you for having that as well.
Any other questions before I move on? All right, to be continued in December. Thank you both so much. We have one action item today, SLA 1, the 2022 Career and Technical Education Course Inventory and Essential Standards. We heard about this work in detail last month. These are revisions that will be effective for the 22-23 school year, but they're coming to us now to ensure that our PSUs have adequate time to plan for the changes that they need to make before registration takes place next spring. I believe Mr. Michael is here. If anyone has any questions, but basically there has not been a change in the material that was presented to us last month. So anyone have any further questions on this before we move on? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Michael. We have one discussion item, SLA 2, report to the General Assembly, statewide administration of the testing program. And Dr. Howard is going to walk us through this.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz, and good afternoon. So this is an annual report that is submitted to the General Assembly as required by statute. This is an odd numbered year, and so it looks a little bit different than it does in the even numbered year. And in the PowerPoint, we're just going to focus on the big takeaways from this report. And having said that, the intention, of course, is twofold. One is to provide information to the public, particularly our parents, of both the annual statewide assessments that are required to make sure those are published, and then also those local assessments that are determined and supported by our PSUs. And you can see all of the requirements that must be reported for these assessments and then are posted to the website for access. When we look at the submission of assessments for the upcoming school year, we'll draw your attention to slide 5. And this shows that this is going in the direction, maybe not aggressively, but it is going in the direction that one would want to see, that probably gets at the intent of this legislation. And that is, if you look at 2020-21 compared to this school year of 2021-22, on the far right, you can see these numbers are decreasing. And of course, that then is increasing the numbers on the left hand of this of these bar charts. But that, of course, is the intention of this work. And so even though some of these numbers are still really high, we are seeing some progress. And that is consistent as well with the average number of hours per LEA. The other was the average number of tests. This is the average number of hours, and you can see here again, you have that decrease on the extreme right-hand side of this, and then, of course, the increases on the left, because we are decreasing on the right. So again, this, I think, was the intention of the legislation all along. So the next subsequent slides have some observations. All of these observations are pretty consistent with what we have had in the past. There's nothing really that's unusual for this coming school year. There is one on slide 9 that we want to emphasize, and that is of all the local tests administered, the percent delivered online increased from 68.7 in 2020 to 81.9 in this report. And so that is a consistent trend with our statewide assessments as well, as we are seeing this uptick in online assessments, which we are very excited about. And of course, just a gentle reminder that the innovative assessment that our team is working on developing as we speak, that it is being developed as an online assessment. So this supports that, and I also think this supports back to Dr. Wren's presentation of the importance of digital in our schools. So those were the main points that we had, Ms. Kamnitz, and if there are any additional information or questions, we'll be pleased to do that.
Thank you. That's a very straightforward report. Any questions for Dr. Howard on this information? Hearing none. Thank you so much, Dr. Howard.
Thank you.
Finally, we have one consent item today. SLA 3 is outcomes for students with disabilities. I suspect Ms. Thomas is here if we have any questions, but basically, this is a required report that is in effect a summary of other reports and actions we've taken over the past year. All of it is data that has been previously reported. And along with this required information being reported out, we are also recommending that this report be eliminated because it is duplicative. So this may be the last time we see it. We'll see. But if there are any questions, we'll be happy to.
She's on the line. She is on the line.
Okay, she is. If there's any questions, I'm sure Ms. Thomas will be happy to answer. But this is very straightforward. All right, hearing none, I will turn it back to you, Vice Chair Davis.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. I now recognize Dr. Olivia Oxendine for the Educator Standards and Practice Committee report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. I am Olivia Oxendine. I chair the ES&P committee, and joining me in that responsibility is Ms. Amy White. We have one new business item on the agenda for my portion of the agenda today, 2 discussion items, and one consent item. So we will begin with a new business item, and this is going to be presented by Dr. Edmonds, Ms. Sherry Thomas, and Dr. Tomberlin. This is, I'm calling naming the first two items on my agenda, I suppose, the day of the principal, the school leader, because this is about school leadership and near and dear to me and the work that I do daily. So an exciting opportunity that Dr. Edmonds is about to share with us, a pilot project, I would think, research maybe, to involve our school leaders in this work around the state. So with that said, Dr. Edmonds.
Thank you, Committee Chair Dr. Oxendine, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, and board members. I too am excited about this item that we have on the agenda today. Over the past several years, CCSSO has led the Advancing Inclusive Principal Leadership Network to support states in increasing the knowledge and skills of principals to lead inclusive schools and effectively serve students with disabilities. As we know, leadership matters. Principal development is a crucial lever to drive school improvement efforts, achieve states' equity goals, and ultimately improve outcomes for each student, especially those with disabilities. In a Wallace report that was released in February of 2021, titled, "How Principals Affect Students in Schools," an effective principal's impact is stronger and broader than previously thought, making it difficult to envision a higher return on investment in K-12 education than the cultivation of high-quality school leadership. And I must mention that the authors of that report are connected to North Carolina. We have Jason Grissom from Vanderbilt, who is a native of Vance County here in North Carolina. We have Anna Agelte from North Carolina State University, and Constance Lindsay from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill are the authors of that report. CCSSO's Advancing Inclusive Principal Leadership State Initiative is designed to help state education agencies develop and implement a plan to advance the preparation and practice of effective, inclusive principal leadership. We are in cohort 2. There was a cohort 1 that included Arkansas, Georgia, Mississippi, and Ohio. And so we're excited to be accepted into cohort 2. And if we go to the next slide for the state board goals, this work addresses the State Board of Education goals, Operation Polaris, and our Leandro work. And we can see that in Strategic Plan Goal 1, to eliminate opportunity gaps by 2025, by having well-trained principals are essential to eliminating disparities in student achievement. In Strategic Plan Goal 2, improve school and district performance by 2025, principals are critical to school and district improvement efforts. We are in the very early stages of engagement with CCSSO around this work, but we are extremely excited about the potential impact across the state. We have DPI staff that's leading this work in collaboration with district partners. I'm going to recognize our DPI staff that's participating in this work, and then I'll have Dr. Tomberlin come behind me to share with you the program overview. So we have Sherry Thomas, who is with us online, Tom Tomberlin, who you will hear from shortly, and we have Mr. Tabari Wallace that's here with us in the audience, who will bring the principal's voice to the work. So we look forward to this work and the potential impact that it will have in our state, and I will now turn it over to Dr. Tomberlin.
Thank you, Dr. Edmonds. Good afternoon, board members and advisors. So the program that North Carolina is engaging in with CCSSO, as Dr. Edmonds stated, we are in cohort 2. So this is an established program with work underway with several states. So North Carolina is entering into a memorandum of understanding with CCSSO to move this work forward. And the goal of this is to develop policies and processes related to developing principals that are prepared to lead inclusive school environments. The focus, as mentioned previously, when we talk about that, we're talking specifically around students with different abilities. So that could be our exceptional children or students with learning disabilities, but also students in advanced and gifted status. So we want to ensure that principals are ready to lead schools that, with an eye towards including all students in their definition of success. So some of the other program requirements. North Carolina will develop tools to support. We will develop tools to support North Carolina with initial analysis of current leadership policies and data. I'm going to be talking with you a little bit later in another section about some of those principal requirements that may need to be updated and addressed. The CCSSO will provide us with a designated coach and assist the state in developing a plan to advance this inclusive principal leadership and training, and help us integrate North Carolina's broader strategic plan and the CEDAR blueprint into the state board's requirements. North Carolina will be participating in this work through December 31st of 2022. And as Dr. Edmonds mentioned, we have assembled a core state team with both DPI and external partners. Dr. Evans covered the DPI team. I will let you know who our external partners are here in just a minute. And we will also develop a stakeholder team feedback on plan and piloting and implementing this work. And as many of you are aware, any work around the principal standards and or program standards would of course go through the PEPC, the Professional Educators Preparation and Standards Commission, and that will be a source of feedback and for us as well on this work. So on the next, so what we need to do to get this work underway is examine our current policies, programs, and practices on principal leadership. That's not limited just to State Board of Education policies, but how our educator preparation programs view their standards on principal preparations and how they implement those practices in the preparation program, how our licensure policies support those areas of preparation. We develop a plan to prioritize effective principal leadership policies and collaborate and share best practices with the other states that are a member of our cohort. So here is the state team that Dr. Edmonds referenced earlier. In addition to the state team members, we have some external partners, and that's on the next slide. We have Dr. William Wright, Superintendent of Hertford County Schools, Ms. Keisha Clemens of Newton-Conover City Schools, Dr. Will Chavis from Wake County, who's their executive leadership coach, Dr. Eddie Price, as many of you will know, heads the UNC, is with the UNC system, but he heads the North Carolina Principal Fellows and Transforming Principal Preparation Program. And then Dr. Laura Bilbo-Berry of the UNC system, who is the executive director over educator preparation and lab schools. So our next steps, we had a virtual convening on October 26th with SEA leadership. That went very well. And now we're looking to convening our state team to review the program requirements and begin the work of recommendations for how we incorporate inclusivity into the principal preparation and licensing standards. We do have a potential in-person meeting that's still a little up in the air, scheduled for March of 2022. And that's a brief overview.
Very exciting work. My question that comes to mind right off the bat has to do, and you referenced it just a minute ago, Dr. Tomberlin, with respect to the preparation standards. So I would imagine, and we haven't, the state board has not adopted the new standards for Well, that's the evaluation standards for principals.
Right, that is the evaluation
Evaluate.
standards. And,
But maybe this, I don't know how much time we would have to focus on maybe another standard or two, or maybe we're already addressing some of the things that this project will be addressing in our current standards.
Right, so just to clarify, the work that's going on with Dr. Sachs is updating our evaluation process to incorporate elements of equity, inclusivity into our principal evaluation rubric. So that work is going on. This may point back to the actual standards. If we look in General Statute 115C 284, that there are statutory requirements on the EPPs for what kinds of things principals must be prepared for in those programs. And so now certainly we can't do less than what's in statute, but the idea here is developing State Board of Education policy that adds to those requirements that our ed prep programs must internalize in preparing our principals for the role.
Excellent.
So we could address this through policy.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy that Ms. Clemens is part of the group. I was wondering. Great.
We are too.
Well, we'll probably hear more from this down the road in the next few months, I would imagine. It sounds like it's about a year, a little bit over a year-long process.
Right. So those we're scheduled for that work through December 31st of next year. But I would imagine we will have periodic updates between now and then on the progress of our work.
Questions, comments from my colleagues? Thank you very much, and I think you can just remain there as we go to the, we've got this all worked out, don't we? So the next item on the agenda is a discussion item, and this pertains to some legislation that was recently passed, and it is about waivers that the State Board of Education is going to eventually approve. And these waivers pertain to the year-long internship work that we have to do in terms of policy work around what is a year-long internship for the principal candidate, the 4-year, a little bit more meat around the 4-year classroom teaching requisite, and the end of program, I'm calling it that, licensing exam. So Dr. Tomberlin is going to take us through a bit more information through a PowerPoint.
Right, so I'm going to go back in time a little bit here and go back to the statute that was in existence prior to the passage of Senate Bill 695, which provided for these waivers. And so 115C 284 are the general requirements for principal licensure in the state of North Carolina. And as we were reviewing these requirements, we discovered leadership in my division, we discovered that we were not in compliance with the law on some of our practices around preparation and licensure for our principals. And I want to point out the sections where, specifically where we did not see the state was in compliance, the state agency. And so the next slide, 115C 284B1, states, to qualify for certification as a school administrator, an individual must meet all the following requirements. And number 5 of those requirements is pass the exam adopted by the State Board of Education. It is my understanding that the principal exam was removed through board action in August of 2011. Unfortunately, with that move, the statute did not change to reflect that change, that shift in policy, and all evidence indicates that that was the goal at the time, was to get the statute to align with the recommendations of the board, but that never occurred. And so technically we are out of compliance by not having an examination, a licensure exam for our principals in the state. Next, 115C 284C2, the State Board of Education shall adopt new standards by July 1st, 2008 for school administrator preparation programs. The new standard shall require all candidates to complete a year-long internship. This is done in practice for the most part, but the definition of what a year-long is varies from EPP to EPP. So we have some that implement this as a 5-month program. Of course, we have a paid internship in the state for full-time master's completers that's 10 months in length. And then some folks do this on a part-time basis, and they do this hours on an hourly basis. But there's no consistent policy of the State Board of Education what the equivalence of that is. If it's a internship, a full-time internship, what is the minimum number of months that we have to qualify for a year-long? And if you're doing it on a part-time basis, what is the hourly equivalent to that year-long internship? 284D1 states that a candidate for the principalship must be a classroom teacher must have attained at least the second level of differentiation, have at least 4 years of classroom teaching experience, and possess at least a master's degree in education administration. So the first part here, that language of second level of differentiation, we're showing you on the next slide how we're interpreting that. That would be, the way we're interpreting that is the conversion of the initial professional license to the continuing license. So a candidate must have a CPL in a teaching area in order to qualify for the principalship. The other problem we have here is this specifically lays out 4 years of classroom teaching experience. Classroom teaching experience is not broad. When we talk about a teacher, that is a broad designation that incorporates instructional support personnel as well as administrators. But the classroom teaching designation is very narrowly focused on the act of teaching in a classroom, which by definition would exclude instructional support folks from being able to hold the principalship. Now that is not the current practice of the state, and so this must be addressed in some way as we work to bring our policies in alignment with state statute. And then finally, the actual waiver, and this is from Session Law 2021-70. So this divides the exemption in two parts. Section 1A deals with folks who are issued a license from 2010 to from the 2010-11 school year to the 2020-21 school year. So incorporating that whole, we were very concerned about the prospect of having to rescind principal licenses for everyone issued one over the past decade, which you could probably understand that would be a great concern to everyone. So this waiver provides for that exemption from those requirements for these folks that were issued the license during that time period and for all their future renewals, whether they met them or not. So all of our principals who are licensed prior to July 1st, 2021 are good. They don't have to do anything extra, and they are taken care of under this waiver. The next, Section 1B, deals with folks who were issued a license after July 1st, 2021. So what this does is it waives those same requirements that we see that are in legislation, but it very narrowly defines to whom this is applicable. And the next section tells us how one qualifies for this waiver. And that is anyone, we'll go to the next slide. It's dragging. So to be eligible for this waiver, the individual must have completed one course towards a master's degree or a postmaster's certificate designed for school administration by August 31st, 2022. So as long as they've completed that one course, they fall under the conditions of the waiver, and we're not going to look at whether they have a CPL or 4 years of classroom teaching, or if they've passed a test, or if they've done the year-long internship. However, starting in what would be the 22-23 school year, anyone enrolling in a master's program, an MSA program, either licensure only or a degree-seeking program, who has not completed one course will be held to the requirements as they are listed in statute. The waiver would not apply to that person. So we're really advertising this to our EPPs. Many of them do a summer session in advance of the traditional year-long program. It behooves them to get folks into that summer program and get a class under their belt if they want to qualify for the waiver. So our next steps here are to gather feedback from the field. Dr. Seiberg is working with Ecats, which is our council of teacher preparation entities, and I am working with our teacher recruitment and retention task force to give feedback on these policies. What do we want principal licensure to look like moving forward? Is this a request from the State Board of Education for legislative changes to our principal policies, or do we simply need to adhere to what's in the law and make sure everyone's clear about what that is? PEPC, of course, those recommendations from those advisory groups will feed into PEPC, who will make a formal recommendation to the State Board of Education, and then you will consider those recommendations and approve them or send them back for more work as you see fit. I am very happy Ms. Kamnitz mentioned homework earlier, because I'd like to add a little on to that. So what we need as we engage in this work is an understanding from the board of what those guardrails are around principal licensure. What do you see has to be a part of a principal licensure process and preparation program, and what would we like to, what could we potentially let go? And these are the four major areas that we need some board direction on. The licensure exam. As I have stood here and talked to you about teacher educator licensure, we have often discussed whether the licensure exam is an indicator of anything as far as effectiveness of our teachers, and we have to consider the same argument in terms of principal. The unfortunate thing here is we don't have any data to support one way or the other, because we haven't had a principal licensure exam in a decade or more. The year-long internship, what does that look like? We have lots of policy. When I think about experience policy, defines a year-long as 6 months or more. In other words, if you teach 6 months, you get a bump to the next year of a level of experience. Is that the criteria? Is it 10 months? Is it 12 months? And then what's the hourly? Do we do something different for folks who are doing a part-time master's program? And then the question of teaching experience. Should our principals be required to have a minimum number of years of teaching experience? And do we require the specific degree of an MSA, or do we want to maintain these licensure-only programs that we have across the state? So those are the big questions that we have, and we will continue to canvass the field and get their feedback, and bring this to PEPC, and come back to the board with some recommendations around this.
Thank you very much. You see our homework assignment, everyone. It's a big one. Each item is worth 5,000 points. I live this so I can talk very authentically about it. I'll try to keep my opinions to myself. Vice Chair Duncan.
So, two questions. The second one's going to come back to the homework assignment, but the first one is, you mentioned statutes or board policy with respect to setting these parameters. My question is there any possibility that it would have to go through rulemaking?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so it would definitely have to go through rulemaking.
Right. So
you did not mention that. That's always.
In my world, rulemaking is always on the horizon.
So,
everything we do has external implications.
So given the timing of that, we're looking at a considerable period of time before we have something firmly set.
Yes, and so this August 31st, for the purposes of rulemaking, this August 31st, 2022, makes the timeline very tight for us.
Either tight or not.
Just to add a little bit of that, if we have a new statute, we can actually do temporary rules as opposed to having to go through the whole rulemaking process before they take effect. So that's a little bit helpful anyway.
That would be helpful. That would cut the
A lot,
time.
that's, because there's a lot to do
Yeah.
within a short period of time. Other questions or comments?
Add one
Oh,
last.
I'm sorry, go
So,
right ahead.
in anticipation of the homework assignment, we have two principal advisors here who have outstanding expertise, and I personally. That's exactly what I'm doing. But I'm gonna do it very nicely. I'd be appreciative of any insights that they might have, that we might benefit from them.
Absolutely. I would imagine that you're going to play a significant role in the discussions around the homework and guiding our thinking on this.
Could you both speak up so my staff can record your comments as you make them?
Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a quick question. I don't know if we've thought about it yet. The year-long internship that's being proposed, is that in-house or is that, you can have it anywhere else? When I say in-house, could they do it at school?
You would
Could they
need
do
to-
it somewhere else?
So I think your
Must be
question.
in the county?
Your internship would need to be in a North Carolina public school unit. So we would allow it for a charter school or a lab school, but you couldn't do it at the corner drugstore. I mean, so it would have to be, or you couldn't do it in Virginia to qualify for the North Carolina license.
But does it have to be at the school of employment?
No.
Okay.
No. That makes it easier in a lot of respects
Yes.
because schools use leave of absences to support folks through the process. But we've got many examples of folks who take the leave of absence from one school district but wind up doing the paid internship in a different school district.
And we also have a lot of examples of the part-time MSA student or the add-on, the student who's getting the license added to the base license, whereby they are completing the internship where they work. And that becomes like a clock hour internship, about 2,000, sometimes to 3,000. The internship comes in a lot of varieties, as Dr. Tomberlin has already described. One of them, a thought that I want us to think about is, an idea to think about is, should the year-long internship cover the normal 9-10 month year, or can it be divided between, let's say, the student begins the internship in the spring semester, let's say in January, and does the first half of the internship during that semester, and goes back during the fall of the next academic year, the school year, to complete the internship. That means the student is experiencing two different groups of students, possibly new teachers, possibly a brand new principal. So that's another variety.
Right, and in practice, we do support that model with our paid internships. We will be incorporating a group of MSA internships in January that will run from January to June, and then they'll pick up on the other side of the next academic year.
Yes. So we know our homework. Go ahead and fill out your paperwork and submit it to Dr. Townsend Smith and on to Dr. Tomberlin. This is very, very good work, very necessary work. We've gone a long time without addressing these issues in policy. So now is the time to do that. Other questions or comments?
I do have one connection I want to make that I didn't explicitly make. In the work that we're doing with the AIPL dovetails nicely with this. We know we're going to have to make changes to principal preparation anyway, and so this work with CCSSO about including inclusivity and leadership for all students in the school makes a nice entry point into that work, so we can try to coordinate those two efforts so there's not reduplication.
All right, very good. Thank you. The next item for discussion, ESP2, and I believe, are you going to present that, Dr. Tomberlin, as well? And it pertains to job description, a new job description and salary grade work for the school mental health clinician. This is this is coming to us based on a lot of feedback, request for the importance of this position from the field. It will be part of the class specifications for non-certified public school employees in that manual. This is a discussion item, and I would imagine that we are going to get a lot of feedback from the field on this item, recommendations from the field. So this is discussion today, and more to come between now and when it comes back to us next month. Dr. Tomberlin, any additional information?
Just want to kind of let you know the process that we went through to develop this job description. And this was driven by school districts contacting me about the need for this job description because they were trying to provide clinical and therapeutic services to their students with folks who did not fall under current state board licensing areas. So your school social workers and your school psychologists, these are both licensed positions within State Board of Education, but they have specific jobs and duties that predate COVID, and so the districts were working to find to leverage other occupational licenses that could provide these clinical services in the school setting. But of course, we don't have a license under the state board for that. So what we did was we worked with our consultants here at DPI to develop a list of occupational licenses that would allow for the delivery of these therapeutic services in schools. And of course, since there's not state board license for it, we're recognizing those licenses, and this is technically a classified position, not a certified position. So where the license hold, if someone has a license, a school social work license, they would still be able to use that license and operate in this capacity if they chose and still be paid on the state salary schedule. But an LPC, let's say, a licensed practical counselor, that is not a state license, and so they cannot be paid on the teacher salary scale. So we've created this salary grade for them. We worked with our consultants to outline the duties and responsibilities and the minimum requirements. We also asked for information from the field at what level of salary they would need to pay to attract candidates to these positions. And we came up with the salary schedule that we've recommended here. Now, subsequent to that, we have sent this job description out to professional organizations. We have sent it to NASW, National Association of School Social Work, the North Carolina branch. We've sent it to our school psychologist professional organization and the school counselor professional organization. The feedback from some of these professional organizations is their concern around the level of the salary. The minimum level of this salary does put these folks earning at a rate that's comparable to the mid of the salary schedule for school psychologists or school social workers. And so the concern is the equity in relation to those positions that we currently have in the state. I have not made changes to that salary grade. This is a matter of discussion, and I'm happy to listen to the board's direction in that regard. I also want to note that this did not go through PEPC because this is not a license area. This is just a job description classified, so that comes directly to the board. So I don't have any feedback from PEPC on this particular matter.
Okay, very good. And I would clarify this for us, Dr. Tomberlin. Is there a shortage of school psychologists in the field? And would this, the creation of this classification, would this and salary job description, would it begin to fill a void?
So I think I think it's a little difficult so is there a shortage of school psychologists? Let's address that. I certainly don't think that we meet the recommended ratio of school psychologists to students that the state needs. Mm-hmm. So to that question, I would say yes. Is this position helping fill that void? Not necessarily, because school psychologists in our schools largely deal with issues of testing for the purposes of identification for special services. This is not what this job description is designed to address. This is for helping students deal with the trauma of the pandemic and the return to school and issues of loss that they might have experienced over that period. So schools are focusing on helping their students get into the emotional frame that they need to be good learners, and that's different than testing. So I think this is designed to specifically address the social emotional needs of our students, and my understanding from many of our districts is that the ESSER funds are being used to largely provide for these kinds of additional services in our schools. So will this help the first question in terms of testing? No, it doesn't. That kind of testing is not listed in the job descriptions. Could a school psychologist fill this role? Absolutely. They would be qualified to fill this role.
Okay, very good. So you need to hear from the board members with regard to the level of salary?
I think there is concern, and I think some of you may have received emails or concerns about the level of the salary.
We
and
have.
certainly, since this is a matter of discussion, we are happy to take the board's direction on repositioning that salary grade.
Sounds good. So board members, you do have a letter. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read it. It's from the North Carolina School Psychology Association. So take a look at the letter. If you have any comments around salary level, job description, any of the concerns that they've raised in the letter, if take a look at it and send me an email or a text message, or we can talk on the phone and provide Dr. Tomlin some direction. So this will return next month. Thank you very much. And the last item is a consent item, and this pertains to an item that Dr. Seiberg presented to us last month, and it is related to an annual report that our EPPs must submit to us. This report does go over to the JLEOC. I believe that this report is due across the street sometime in December. And the report is as completed as we can make it, given the absence of some information and the absence of information that the pandemic brought about. So it does include the survey satisfaction data as well as evaluation data of principals and teachers. So what is missing, but will come about at a later time, is EVOS information. So we are going to act on this item today, not tomorrow, but today. And a question? No. And with that said, that completes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We will now move to the Business Operations Committee report for the final committee report of the day. Along with Todd Chastain, we lead this committee and have several items for consideration today. But before we start, as a follow-up to a comment made by Ms. White earlier, wanted to say that one of the reasons we've had a lot of reporting, which I think has been helpful to the board, about how ESSER funds are being allocated and what the status is of the ESSER funds, is to do the very thing you're suggesting, to be part of the monitoring process for it. And then that's going to continue to include, for example, the summer school report that's been asked for, to make some evaluation when it comes back, I believe, in January, in terms of what we believe was successful and what we might not want to duplicate again. So we're working hand in hand, if you will, with the other committees that really oversight these items, but to make sure those committees have the information. We want to raise that information because they really do work. In this instance, they work hand in hand, but your committees take the lead, obviously, on assessing that, but we want to make sure all the information is there. So that was a helpful comment and supports what our committee has been working with, and Dr. Marr, to his credit, has been working with us on it all along as well. So just wanted to reinforce that good thought. On BizOp 1, we have 3 contracts over $500,000, and we will do a minute or less report for each of those. Mr. Julian Alhauer has the first one, followed by Dr. Tom Berlin, who cannot get away from the mic, followed by Ms. Tracy Tillis.
Okay. Good afternoon. So the first contract is we're asking you to approve the agency to exercise its final year option to renew Qualtrics. This is the primary software tool that we use in the agency. Last year it didn't take us over the $500,000 threshold. With this renewal it took us over, so maybe it's the first time that comes before you. With the Vice Chairman agreement, I would answer any questions you want.
Are there any questions on this one? This contract has come to our attention at one point in the past, but I think we worked through those issues. That was a couple of years ago. But
Correct. We transferred to unlimited users, unlimited responses, so we were never going to run into one area taking over responses from another, and we expanded it department-wide. So.
Right. Thank you for that adjustment. I think that will help save those kinds of issues arising again. Dr. Tomberlin. He thought he got away.
He's doing it.
All right. This homework assignment thing goes both ways.
He's coming up with new assignments.
We were doing our homework.
Thank you.
The attorney was taking me behind the woodshed after.
It's a tough moment for you. You're doing well.
I'm at a loss. Leadership, this is enhancements to the leadership dashboard, if I'm not mistaken. So we have a contract with we have a grant from the Wallace Foundation to help develop principal pipeline initiatives in our districts. We have convinced the partner districts in that grant to pool their money and create a state-level leadership dashboard. Unfortunately, because it's housed within the EVOS system and contains confidential information about teachers, I can't show it to you, but trust me, it's a wonderful thing, and our partners have given us feedback on how we could enhance it and make it better for them to identify folks to incorporate into their principal pipeline. We have taken their advisement. We're working with SAS to create these upgrades, and these funds are coming from the Wallace Foundation to support this work. We have received, Vice Chair Duncan, I think in our last call, I indicated we had a December 31st deadline. Wallace has given us a no cost extension to June 30th of 2022, so we're covered with the work on that. And these funds will revert back to Wallace if we don't use them. And so this is the district's money that they're asking us to spend for them in this way. So,
thank you.
Yep.
So on this particular item, we hear a lot about dashboards. This is a separate proprietary dashboard, housed by EVOS, and obviously contains highly confidential information, but is of benefit to the department, looking at it as a larger type item. Thank you. Ms. Tracy Tillis. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Amendment 9 of the Ecats contract, which I believe you've been provided material on, is comprised of 3 change requests that support or enhance the regulatory functionality of the Ecats system. The total for all 3 changes is $37,401, and it would be paid for with federal funds.
Thank you. Any questions on this one? All right, thanks very much. And it's going to enhance our Ecats capabilities, as I understand it, which is something that we all welcome.
And I feel like I come every month
Yeah.
to it, but thank you very much.
Enhancements are a good thing in this area. Our next item is BizOp 2, School Bus Transportation Equivalency Recommendations. The board will recall we went through 2 or 3 months of working through the policy for these school bus transportation equivalencies approach, how we go forward as a policy. We've reached that, and now we have the practical result of that. We have the first 2 applications to go through this equivalency process, and Kevin Harrison is here to report on that.
Good afternoon. So, been a long day so far, long week really. But so this is these are 2 school systems have requested equivalency for their routing systems that they are now utilizing. The first of those, well, first of all, the TIM system is the system that we use for school bus routing. So it allows districts to electronically plan what those buses are going to do. And there's an implementation that is mandated as of, well, a long time ago, 1992. But they have to implement either the system, the Transportation Information Management System, which was bid out in the 80s in North Carolina, or they have to utilize a system that the State Board of Education approves. So the use of this information we've talked about before, but really it's equitable distribution of state transportation funds and us being able to provide service metrics about how each district compares to other districts related to how they're transporting students. The equivalency steps that were laid out in previous meetings are that the superintendent requests, the PSU superintendent requests a review. We evaluate the system based on public school unit data, and then we make a recommendation to the board. After that, if the SBE approves, then the PSU may discontinue their use of the existing TIMS routing system at their discretion in favor of the new system. Of course, we want them to make sure that everything was up and running. School bus transportation being extraordinarily important to operations in general, we want to make sure that they're comfortable doing so. This doesn't require them to do it at any point in time. They can utilize both systems for as long as they like. So into the details how we will evaluate a system, which is that it accepts the standard student information system data from PowerSchool. Currently, it doesn't say that specifically, but PowerSchool is the student information system. Provides computer-assisted routing functions, and then it can demonstrate that it outputs that information that we require and would normally get from TIMS. So with that in mind, we have 2 requests. Those 2 requests are from Harnett for the bus planner system and Mount Airy City Schools for the Traversa system. So those systems, the Mount Airy one, I guess we'll deal with first the Mount Airy one. The superintendent submitted the request. The import of the student information data was successful. Just keep it moving along for you today. And we evaluated the system functions based on the prior evaluation of Nash County. It was in 2010. And they output the data successfully. The second equivalency request was in Harnett County Schools. Harnett County Schools implemented Bus Planner. They're in the middle of that implementation, full implementation, and Harnett County Schools was successfully able to import the student information system data. We did a review of the functions based on a more full delineation of the current TIM system functionality. Slight difference between how we did it with previously and how we did it with Harnett County. Mainly because we were rebuilding the plane as we flew it in January, and we had something more fully laid out by the time Harnett County Schools came and asked. So, but either way, we think that the systems are functionally very similar to TIMS. We found no deficit in the functionality of the bus planner system. Both school systems submitted a letter to DPI indicating that the systems that they have acquired and put in place have sufficient functionality for them to successfully put in place a safe, efficient school routing system in their district. And again, both of them output the standard data successfully. So with that in mind, our objective would be to go ahead and recommend the state board approve both of those systems, which is the Traversa implementation in Mount Airy City Schools and the bus planner implementation in Harnett County Schools as equivalent for the purposes of meeting the requirements of 115C 240D.
Any questions on these? These are our first, under the new policy, these are our first specific actions. All right, not hearing any, I think you've educated us well, so thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Our next item is Phys Op 3, which is a policy amendment for early grade reading proficiency. Amy Ryan is here for this report.
So good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
PRC 085 is a policy that governs the Excellent Public Schools Act funds that are allotted to public schools, except for summer reading camps, which are funded through PRC 016. With the updates and the new requirements for Read to Achieve, there was a need to make modifications for the use of these funds to serve and support our public schools as well as align to the new law. In an effort to align to the new legislation, we're proposing several recommended changes for your consideration and approval. Changing the name to Literacy Intervention Funds, removal of the language related to the formative and diagnostic reading assessment, which was in there previously because of the multi-vendor district contracts, the addition of the requirement for PSU literacy intervention plans to be approved by DPI per the new legislation effective 22-23. Allot the funds for third grade students who have been retained twice, which was previously in reading camp funds, PRC 016, we'd like to transfer that to 085. And then add allotments to reimburse eligible LEAs for substitutes and stipends for the Science of Reading Letters training. And this, last but not least, that would be an allotment of $165 per training session. Specifically with NC pre-K teachers and public school preschool teachers, they'll have 2 sessions per year. And with anyone who's doing the K-5, they would be eligible for 4 sessions per year, total of 8 over 2 years. And those funds would be to support the training during that fiscal school year. So at this time, I can answer any easy questions, and if they're more complex, the true expert is Alexa, so now I'll ask her to come up.
Any questions on this allotment policy adjustment in PRC 085? Don't hear any. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
ISOP 4 is state board policy amendment for under ESSER 2, school nutrition COVID support. And this is an allotment adjustment under PRC 174. Dr. Harvey, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's good to be with you. As you may recall, the legislature appropriated $10 million in ESSER 2 funds for school nutrition programs statewide in order to enable them to respond to COVID. Based upon the recommendations and the information gleaned from our local leaders, it became clear that an appropriate use of this money would be to support retention and recruitment bonuses for school nutrition personnel. This especially given the 15 to 25% staff shortage that we're seeing roughly throughout the state. So our timing, we believe, was good. Now, in developing the allotment policy, we chose to implement a special provision that would help us better identify those individuals who would be eligible for these special funds. That special provision simply stated that eligible personnel would be paid through the school nutrition fund. Now, as our PSUs began to prepare their applications, we learned that many conditions this year have prompted our local leaders to shift school nutrition compensation funding to other sources. Local funding sources, district funding sources, other state funds, possibly even grants. And if we read this technically, this would mean these individuals, approximately 400 of them, would unintentionally be ineligible for these funds. So we want to correct that by just modifying the language to suggest that certainly those eligible are compensated under the school nutrition fund or any other fund as long as the district provides substantial documentation that the employee is engaged directly in the operation of the school nutrition program. So we think this will easily resolve the issue, and our public school units continue to submit their plans for the recruitment and retention bonuses. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments on the modification needed here? All right, not seeing any. Thank you, Dr. Harvey.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That moves us to BizOp 5, which is the ARP Committee of Practitioners member recommendations and policy amendments. Dr. Marr has earlier referred us to this, and now you can take center stage with it.
Yes, sir. So one of the requirements of the American Rescue Plan was that we engage in regular and ongoing consultation with various stakeholders that are laid out in the plan. And so as a result, we brought to you a policy to create an ARP Committee of Practitioners. we are asking for approval of this committee, which we actually expanded to 31 members to ensure that we met all of the different groups who should be represented in this body. So with that, I'll take any questions, but the list is there in your board materials.
Are there any questions on this? I have gotten one question, so let me just ask it so you have a position to respond to it. The question was that I received was that the ratio, generally speaking, of traditional public schools to charter schools is 10 to 1-ish or some ratio like that. It looked like the representation of charter schools was a little bit disproportionate. That is a little higher than a 10 to 1 ratio. Can you explain why that would be under the setup of this committee?
Is that in terms of the teachers represented? I mean, we have one charter school advisory board member.
And then there's 2 charter school leaders, and what was pointed out was up above, there's 2 principals or other school leaders, which doesn't really specify even though it would be traditional.
Sure.
And then 2 superintendents. And so the question was that didn't seem fully consistent with the number of students who attend the traditional public schools versus the number of students that attend the charter schools, and that was the genesis of the question.
Yeah, I don't know that we specifically looked at kind of ratios and representation. We looked for broad representation from stakeholders throughout the body. We took recommendations from a variety of individuals, both inside this building and outside, and this was the list that we generated.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. We'll go on to Biz Op 6 and
stay right here.
Stay right there. And this is a matter that's been before the board before, but it's a request to allocate unallocated elementary and secondary emergency relief funds, leadership funds under ESSER 2.
Yes, sir. So these are the items we brought to the board, I believe, 2 months ago. And in the committee call, we had a conversation about some of these items were recommended or requested budget items, and so we'll work to ensure that we implement those last. Given the state of the budget, we're not sure when that's going to happen. But essentially, it's the same list of items I brought 2 months ago. I'm happy to answer additional questions if there are any.
And I think the recommendation is that we proceed to go ahead and pass this at this point because the need to get it passed, but we hopefully would be in a position to make a determination which of these items might be included in the budget if a budget is passed in the next short period of time, which we all hope for.
Yes, sir, and I'll work with Ms. Shafts to make sure we do that.
And that would be the recommendation, I take it, including that caveat.
Yes.
I'm going.
Please, go ahead.
I'm going to go step back for about a minute. The item on the committee of practitioners, member recommendations, just point out there's a spelling error in Stacy.
Okay, we'll fix it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's good to see that representation.
Any questions on Biz Op 6? All right, very good. We've covered that one certainly pretty thoroughly at this point. So
no homework for me, so thank you.
No, you're good. I think you feel like you've got more than enough homework already.
You can help us.
All right, are there any questions on the executed contracts report? On the planned contracts report, I've received a comment, which is a follow-up actually to something that's been said. On the planned contracts report, it appears there's a couple of contracts in there that may have already been executed before they had been approved by the board. So that's just a reminder that we need to be ever diligent to make sure those contracts are on the plan stage before the board, before they get to the executed stage. So that's the one comment I got, and I actually agree with that comment. I think we do need to try to be very diligent about that. Not that it's easy to do, but we need to be diligent about it. Any other comments anybody has on any of those contracts? All right, and then we have the budget report, and we don't have a budget-specific item given Alexis's presentation yesterday for this month. And we have the personnel report, which we don't really have anything new that's not covered in the charts. So unless there's a specific question arising out of that, Ron Paxton's here to respond to it if there is, but otherwise, the BizOp committee will be done. Judging by the silence, we're done.
Thank you.
And board members, that concludes our committee reports. We do have, under new business, we have an item which is an amendment to the Student Accounting and Attendance Manual, and Allison Schaefer, our General Counsel, is here to bring that item to our attention for some action today.
As we continue to deal with COVID issues, hello members of the board, we've already said hello and closed last night, but nice to see all of you. We have an issue with the attendance manual that we have in place at the department, and it's needs to be changed because the manual says that that excused absences are only when there's a quarantine or isolation order in place by the local health department, and some districts are asking whether excused absences also includes quarantine and isolation decisions that are made without an actual order because DHHS has required them to be made as a control measure. So what we are asking for you to do, and the proposed amendment is in your information, but to add an excused absence for quarantine and isolation that doesn't have an actual order from the local health department. So the way it would read is when isolation of quarantine is when isolation of the student is ordered by the local health department, local health officer, or by the state board of health, or when isolation or quarantine of the student is required, is a required state or local control measure. So it should take care of that problem. Obviously, we don't want our students to be counted as an unexcused absence for doing what they should do, which is quarantining when they have been exposed to COVID-19. So we would ask for your approval of that. And we've had calls from the legislature and from different school districts and parents about this, and so it's just something we need to take care of.
So we have any questions or comments on this proposed item, which we will vote on in just a few minutes? All right, not seeing any. Do any board members have any additional items of new business that we need to bring forward today? All right, not seeing any of those either. I want to briefly say it's November. November's always been a special month to me because it's a time of gratitude. We end the month with Thanksgiving, which is the one holiday of the year where the entire object is to give thanks. The name of it is to give thanks. And we have a lot to give thanks for in the world we live in. Our precious students, our educators, our classified employees all have done so much during these very difficult times. And I think we all acknowledge and recognize and have heard about it. There's real stress on students, families, our educators, our classified employees. Many have gone way above and beyond the call to help our students and to do the right thing for our kids. So we're really blessed, and I hope that we use this month of gratitude. I mean, we should have gratitude every month, truly, but I hope we use this month of gratitude in particular to give thanks to those people who deserve our thanks. So I lift that up. And while I'm at it, November is also Veterans Day, observed next week, and it's also a time to give thanks for those who have served to protect us and served for us in so many ways. I know there's people in this room who have served. May I ask you, anyone who has been in the service, to please stand up? And I would note that if our chair were here, he would be standing up. And I would note that if the superintendent's spouse was here, he would be standing up. So we are, and I'm sure that's true for a lot of your families. So we are very, very blessed to be supported by a lot of people. And so, again, it's a time to give thanks for people who have provided selfless service to us. So let's look forward to the Thanksgiving season with all the joy that it deserves, but with all the thankfulness that it truly deserves. Not having any further business, board members, we will now vote on any item requiring action from your committee reports. A thorough discussion and report was provided on each item, including any respective consent items. An opportunity for questions and comments to be asked or made was also provided. Remember that any item on the consent agenda is primarily not complex and may have come to the board for discussion in a prior month. I note that board members have also seen these consent agenda items for at least a week. At this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any item from the consent action or action on first reading agendas. If there's no request to remove any item, then I ask for a motion to approve the October 6 through 7, 2021 meeting minutes, SLA 1 through 3, Turn 1, which is a turnaround school recommendation we discussed today, EICS 1 and 4 through 5, HRS 1, BizOp 1 through 6, ES&P 3. The IPL-ILT licensure approvals that we reviewed yesterday in closed session, the residential schools hire recommendations that we reviewed yesterday in closed session, and the ISD hire recommendations that we reviewed yesterday in closed session. And finally, the amendment to the student accounting and attendance manual that we just heard about moments ago. Is there any reason to pull any of these to be voted on separately? Yes, Ms. White.
Mr. Vice Chair, just a reminder that we made the decision as a board to move EICS 2, the NC Access Timeline Application and Rubric Update, to an action on first read to make the recommendation that term for review would be 7 years due to COVID waivers.
That's your turn, your
I think that's turnaround one.
I'm sorry, turnaround one, yes.
Okay, so we have it covered, I think, then. Very good. Any other items that anyone?
And then
Dr. Townsend Smith, I know I'm in trouble if your hand's up.
just for clarification, the SLA is SLA 1 and 3.
All right. If I misspoke and said differently, I apologize. It is SLA 1 and 3. I wrote it down right. Apparently didn't say it right, so thank you. And any other, let's go back then, first of all, with that in place, is there anyone who wants any item pulled and voted on separately? Not seeing any of those, then I think we're ready to hear a motion, should there be one, to approve all these items.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Dr. Oxendine and a second by Mr. Hall. Dr. Townsend Smith, would you be kind enough to call the roll?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Ms. Keenan?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Mr. Hall? Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes. So we would typically say at this time, I request a motion to adjourn, but Mr. Keenan would like to briefly say something about you want me to say it? We have a youth risk behavior survey that the board has voted on to go out. And we need to make sure that we get a sufficient response that we can have a valid statewide set of information on that. So some of you may have gotten some questions within your areas or districts, for those who represent districts. We need to work with our superintendents to see if we can, and work with our staff here to make sure we can get a representative and sufficient sample to meet the needs to have at least a statewide response. So that's something that I would ask the board's support. We're not voting on it, but ask the board's support to help our superintendents to work through getting sufficient numbers, and so that we got a statistically valid survey that would be accepted, and that we would then be eligible to get whatever additional federal support might be there to help on the issues that may arise out of that. So that's something that I think comes out of the committee and that Mr. Keenan has asked me to lift up for us before we leave today. I'll stop if anybody wants to comment on that. All right, not hearing any, then we're open for a motion to adjourn. Ms. White.
Treasurer Falwell, make that motion.
All right, Ms. White second. Treasurer Falwell made the motion.
Who seconded? I'm sorry.
Ms. White.
Okay, thank you. All right. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Camden?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell? Treasurer Falwell? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes. All right, we have, motion satisfied. We have completed the meeting. Thanks to all for all your work. Thanks to our staff for their very hard work throughout, and we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Motion in that motion.
Motion that motion.